So for step 10, attaching the rear dampers, we're going to need to pull some pieces together in order to attach the bottom of the damper to the axle. And then above, we've got some screws, and then we have this BD2 spacer. Now, let's get rid of confusion, because it might be confusing on this step. And just so you understand and make sure you get the right part, let's just look at something. You'll see here that it says bag D. We will need the BD2 4x6. Well, I've pulled out the two brass ones, but you'll notice in here that there are two silver ones. And they almost are identical. One says it's a 6x5, one says it's a 6. But when you put them together, and in fact, if I was to grab one of these right now, you'll see that it is almost identical. There's barely anything in it in terms of sizing, and even for me, I'm looking at it going, well, it's almost the same. I don't understand. Well, I've been looking at this and figuring this out. See this? See how it's a darker shade? That is how you know that it's going to be the brass one, not the silver one. And we can look at this a different way. So if I flip to the back where it talks about the different parts, you'll notice that there's a BD1, the BD2, and the BD3. Now the BD3 spacer is what we used on step 1 when you needed a spacer inside the gearbox. So that was silver. So in my head and the way that I've reasoned this out, the BD1 is going to be the 3x6.5, and the brass one will be the BD2 at 4x6. So coming back to here, we're going to be using the brass bushing for this, which will be the BD2. So just so that you are not confused, when you see this, you want to grab the brass spacer, not the silver spacer. Anyways, I'll set this all up and let's put this together. So I think what we'll do is we're going to attach the top first before we attach it to the bottom. I think it'll be easier in the end doing it that way than the reverse. So I'm going to grab one of the shocks, and you can see that we need the BB1 screws. So those were the longer ones. And again, you can always test, just put it on and it's going to be a match, which you can see there. It is a match. So we know that it's got to go through one of these brass bushings. The shock itself is going to go on the outside. So this is going to go through and into that hole. And we're just going to screw it in, as long as it doesn't fall out of the hole. So let's grab this and we'll start screwing it in. Okay, so that's one. And then we've got to do the bottom. So for the bottom, you can see that they want you to grease the ball and grease the bracket. And of course, the other side of the bracket, just like there, is going to be greased as well. So we'll do that. Let's just put a little bit of grease in there. And we'll grease up the ball. Because this is going to be there's going to be a lot of movement here. So I want to make sure there's enough on there. Okay, so then that is going to fit into where that ball bracket would be, and then we've got this piece here, which is going to fit on the on either side of that ball, and then be attached with the screws. Now with this, these are the BA3s, and they're the smaller ones. Grab the screwdriver. And just sort of starting that off, and we'll grab the other one. Just screw that in. So along the way, I'm kind of going back and forth from one screw to the other side, just to make sure that everything is held properly. And of course, I'm going to need to put a bit more hand pressure on this one. There we go. So there we go. So there is one side finished. It's quite an interesting design, really. So that part is done. So we've got the top and we've got the bottom. So let's move on to the other side. So same again. We're going to grab our shock. We're going to grab our longer BB1 screws, put that spacer through, and again, now we're going to screw that in. And of course you can only go a certain distance because the spacer is going to stop the screw from screwing any farther. So that is in. So now same again, we're going to have to grease up the ball on the bottom of that shock. So I'm going to put a little bit here into the ball, and we're going to grease up the ball again. And then that's going to sit inside of the other half of that ball cup, I guess you could call it. And then that will now sit on either side. And now we're going to grab the two remaining smaller screws, those BA3s. Screw that in farther than before, and then with this one, same again. Once I know that that seems correct, we'll just screw this all the way in. And there we go. So there is our rear oil-filled dampers attached to the chassis. So this is great because, again, you know how you can see, if I adjust the camera just a little bit, let's bring it up a little bit here. You can see how this is sitting. So you have that up and down motion and it feels very smooth, but there's also now a bit of side to side. So that's the big difference with the Grasshopper. We didn't have that with the Grasshopper. The Grasshopper could only go up and down. This is giving you a bit of side to side motion as well. So that's very cool. So that step is done. We're finished. We can move on to now step 11, which is charging the battery, which is going to be fairly simple, which means we're going to be moving on to step 12, which is checking the RC equipment. So I'll get everything together and let's move on to that step.